My name is Eric Hayes. I'm sort of a newcomer to Victoria about 10 years ago, but used to come here as a kid with my grandparents lived here, and I remember when there were no four-lane roads and, things were out, yeah. I came here for 1 year of university, 1963, 64, and that's when I found out this was a city for the newlywed and the nearly dead. Yeah, that's right. And now I'm very proud to say I actually fit in one of those demographics, so I feel like this is my home, finally. This whole thing, this book got started because of my wife, Susan, who's on the left there. She was adopted. I'm adopted. We're both adopted. And through DNA, we've found our families. We're talking about her today, so she found that Stu was her uncle. And that's very cool. Yeah. And Diane is Stu's sister on the right. You may have met her, you may not. But so she's a Palfrey, and she never knew it until just a couple of years ago. It's very exciting. So what I did is, I don't know if you know how Ancestry works, but you spit in a tube and they send it off to Ireland, and they connect it up, analyze it, and connect it up with databases of other people who've done the same thing. And then they find if there's, the computers find if there's any strands of DNA that are in common. Then you get an email telling you that, and if you want to communicate with that person, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But she immediately got an email from a woman named Sharon Jones in Vernon. And she used to be Sharon Dunnigan. She used to live on Glanford Avenue. And they had turned out to be second cousins. How this works is if you, the number of G's determines your cousin, how many cousins you are. So if you have, if you're your first cousins, you have the same grandparents. If you're second cousins, you have the same great grandparents. So it turns out that Susan and Sharon both had the same great grandparents, which were the people that originally bought 5 acres right across from the Red Barn Market there back in 1896 or 1893, 1889, somewhere in there. Anyway, so I started delving into it, and we'll get on back to the book here, and I'll show you where it all began. It turns out that Stu's grandmother is the feisty gal on the left, and that's Stu's mom on the right, the dark hair, and those are Stu's two sisters and brother. And Stu is inside. He's behind that apron as she's pregnant with him. And of course, these are all Susan's relatives too. So I'll just quickly go through the book, and then we'll talk about how we made it. But it turns out that Stu's grandmother, I mean, this is famous stuff, exciting for me. Stu's grandmother came on the Oregon Trail. This is Stu's great grandfather. He brought his family and his brother and and their family in a covered wagon on the Oregon Trail in 1865. So it's sort of like knowing someone who survived the Titanic or something. It's kind of like a famous, relatives that were there. And I thought this was pretty interesting, so I'm going to talk just a bit about this. Part of doing research, first of all, I'm not a historian and I'm not a genealogist, but I've learned to love good stories. And one of the things I found is that this is what a day on the trail is. 4 o'clock. Bugler blows a trumpet or a rifle is fired to wake up the camp. 5 a.m., cattle are rounded up. At 5:30, women and children are up and fixing breakfast, usually bacon, corn porridge, or Johnny cakes. At 6:30, the women rinse the plates and mugs and stow the bedding while the men haul down the tents and load them in the wagons. And at 7 o'clock, after every family has gathered everything, the trumpeter signals, "Wagons ho," and off they go. Average distance 15 miles. That's about from here to Sydney. And it's not just 1 day or 2 days, it's for 5 months. 5 months of camping trip. Every day you got to go find a place to camp, find where there's water, find a place to poop. So nooning time, they take a break at noon and everybody stops to rest. Then 1 o'clock back on the trail. 5 o'clock, look for a place to camp. 6, unpack. 7, do chores. Young people dance. 8 o'clock, go to bed. I did a bit of writing in this book, so I wrote a few of the stories here, and I'm not going to read them, but this is one of the fun things, is to do a family tree. And you can see at the top there, there's that Moses Riley Robbins. And by the way, if you really want to know about the Robbins family, there's this big book, the Robbins and the Heron families that came out to Oregon and to the West Coast. This work's all done by Kevin Mitke. He's a genealogist in Oregon, and it's his family. And there's lots of stories in here about, some people kept diaries on the trail about the crazy things that happened, the people that got drunk, the people that died. I don't know if you know much about the Oregon Trail, but when they set off, they were sold all kinds of stuff, as you can imagine, like the hardware stores had pots and pans and all kinds of things for you in Missouri, wherever you began the trail. And it was just littered, apparently, for, miles and miles and miles. People found they had way more stuff than they needed. They'd been sold all kinds of things they didn't need, just jettisoned it. And then people got sick and they were buried. Long thing. Anyway, back to this on the right here. I discovered all this about the Palfrey family. It started with Moses. And I thought it's kind of cool name to have when you're leading your family on a trek across the country. Anyway, they went to Oregon for 15 years and did farming. I guess the lure of free land and all that brought a lot of, somewhere between, 400 and 800,000 people went west in the 20-year period between 1845 and 1865. Anyway, he gave up farming. I guess he got the land and then gave it up and came to Victoria and brought his family with him. His wife died shortly after they got here. He became a watchmaker in downtown Victoria. They lived somewhere in Fernwood. He remarried. And his daughter, who came with him, the 9-month-old baby, Mary Morville Minnie Robbins, when she was 23, she met a 43-year-old widower from England who had worked in the iron furnaces in Yorkshire and Lancashire. And he brought 3 kids with him. And so there's a 20-year gap, but they got together. He was a super duper guy. I'll get to him. Anyway, on this side is all the Palfreys. The daughter, there were three kids. There was Lillian, Edward, and the daughter Minnie. A shortage of names here, Minnie. And then she had kids, and you can see Stu is the second one from the bottom. And the third one from the bottom on the right is what turned out to be Susan's mother, Bonnie. Lily over here she got married 3 times. She had a brother named Edward. She married an Edward. They had a daughter named Lillian. So there's 2 Lillians, at least 2 or 3 Edwards. She worked in the school down here at Royal Oak, and down, what's the other one? Can't remember. Anyway, she married 3 times, and the 3rd time she married the brother of one of her previous husbands, so she didn't have to change her last name. She was very proud of that. Anyway, so this is all bits from this book. From this book, I copied a few pages with his permission, and I'm just going to get through here to, this is the house. So John Adams and Mary Morville Minnie Adams, Robin Adams, built a house on that 5 acres. This is their marriage certificate on the right. This is the land. On the left here, this one from 1862 shows, you can imagine, there was nothing here, right? It was just, when did the first settlers come? The colonists in the 1850s, right? So this is 1862. What was the Pioneer Inn was built? Prairie Inn. When was that? In the 1850s something? Yeah, so this is right at the very beginning of populating this area. So you see section 100 there. I'm going to go up here just because it's so important. This has got an overlay of the highway to the to Sydney now, and the interchange there. This is Glanford Avenue. This is Van Almen. And the 5 acre, this was, William Foote bought this land in 1858 for $480, 100 acres. And in 1893, it was subdivided into basically 5 acre parcels. And this John Adams, who had just arrived here, by the way, bought one of them. And I'm thinking, he came in 1888. The railroad had just come through to Vancouver in 1886 or 87, and there was the streets were all mud with wood sidewalks. Do you remember, any of you remember wooden sidewalks and muddy roads? I do. I remember Fraser Mills in New Westminster, where my uncle lived back in the 1950s, still had mud roads and wooden sidewalks. Anyway, so he bought that, and they immediately built a house. You can see I put it in yellow here. The red barn market's right there. This is the railroad. This is the Victoria Sydney Railroad. And it went right through where today KMS Tools is. And over here where there used to be the Playland curling club. So it's quite fascinating because I didn't know any of this. And you can see this is that was 1915. 1921, the railroad's in disuse. It was only, the VNS was only here for 1894 to 1918 or 1919, very short time. And in this one here, this is from 1974, and you can still see the original farmhouse that John Adams built and the greenhouses that Stu's dad put up later. The church that was built up there where Stu was married on a piece of that original 5 acres. Here's used to be the Sears distribution center and now KMS. And you can see this big cut through here where the railroad used to go. And there's the Playland Curling Club and their parking lot then. All long gone now, but interesting. So here's the railroad. This was fun, finding this picture, taken in 1916, of the actual train going through, what's it called, Rogers Crossing, which is down near Agnes Avenue. And then I found, Susan noticed it, I found this big drawing of the train on the side of the Travelers Inn, the corner of Queens and Blanchard in downtown Victoria. Susan saw it out of the corner of her eye. Because we were just talking about, the VNS had 3 wood-fired engines, and they weren't very powerful. So if you were going into Victoria, it was okay because it was downhill. They could stop at the Glanford Avenue there at Van Almen. But coming back, you had to get off down at get off at Rogers Crossing, she's saying, but what's the school down there? Sorry. Up. Anyway, or you got up at Royal.
There's Rogers School.
Yeah, there is a Rogers School, yeah. Or Royal Oak, and you had to walk back, and it was about a mile. And it's anyway that painting, beautiful painting of the train, is right there today on the side of this building, right near where the, very close to where the terminal used to be at Topaz Park. Anyway, it was a bit of a joke because the locals called it the Cordwood Limited because it burned wood, and it says a slightly less complimentary name was the Tri-Weekly because even though it ran every day, it tried weekly to get up the hill. So this is what John Adams did. He bought chems from England, marries this woman 20 years younger than him, gets a job with the city putting in water mains. And it was right at that time that they built that 1900, they built that pumping station, which is now the Keg. Everyone knows that on Quadra. And I found this picture of the original, what it used to look like with the smokestack. I'm assuming it was steam-powered pump, and they brought water from Elk Lake and Beaver Lake to Victoria, and that was okay for a few decades, and then there wasn't enough water, so that's when they had to go to Souk and put in that whole thing down there to bring water up here. Anyway, he was, apparently they didn't keep very good records, because Diane, Sue's sister, remembers that her hearing from her mom how her grandfather had to go out in a buggy. He was sick. He had, what did he have? He had a heart valve problem. Today, be easily solved, but for 10 years he suffered with a leaky heart. Bundled him up, put him in a buggy, and ran him around. He showed the people where the water mains were. These stories were priceless to me to find them out. So we'll just kind of go through a lot of this, and this is Minnie Adams when she died, Minnie Robbins Adams, and there's her husband's, there's John's death certificate. Says he had a heart condition called chronic valvular disease, which just means you've got a heart murmur. But if it's bad, it impacts on your daily life. Anyway, just to go back here, her daughter married this guy. So we had the first Englishman that came, and then her daughter Minnie met this guy, Wilfred Palfrey, and he was very dashing, I would say, and she married him, and there's their marriage certificate, and the story that Stu told me about how they met, and here they are in the park with the kids, and there's the 4 children they had. So Stu is on the left, and then his brother Leighton, and then Diane and Bonnie, who would become Susan's mom. There they are all lined out, and Stu, for some reason, Stu's mom made him these military uniforms all the time. He's got the little Air Force cap. If you look here, he's actually got a little insignia. It's funny, eh? So one of the sources when you're doing a book like this, aside from people's stories, is newspapers. And there's something called newspapers.com, and you can get access to the old local papers here, The Colonist, online for free. And I found this story about the child Joyce Exton being rescued by her friend Doreen Ponsford in 1935. Probably the family doesn't even remember anything about that. And there's I have a picture now of what that looks like, and there's no field, there's buildings, as you can imagine. The day the barn burned down, these two, there's Leighton and Diane, and she tells a story about, now they're only like 2 years old here, but when they were 5 and 6, he was 5 and she was 6, and she got in trouble for not looking after him well enough. You could not put a 6-year-old in charge of a 5-year-old, not today, and get away with it. But anyway, he climbed up on the stove and grabbed matches and took them out in the barn to play. And that barn's right behind. So 4 years after that picture was taken, that little kid would burn it down, and Diane would get in trouble for not keeping him under control. There's the barn, the new barn. They built a new barn after the old one went down. This was state of the art. Stu says we were milking 22 cows by hand, and when they put the new one in, it all had milking machines. And he said, he said it was way ahead of anything else. Fancy cement feed troughs for the cows. The water was underground and came up through automatic feed watering things. Cows just pushed their nose down, the bowl filled up. Anyway, he said we could put 2,000 or 3,000 bales of hay upstairs every year. It was a monstrous barn. So there's the kids tearing down the remnants of part of the old one. Stu is on the left with his dog, Lucky. Bonnie's in the middle, and Leighton, his brother, on the right.
Where was that barn?
Where was the barn?
Yeah.
Well, it was it's on that 5 acres of land across from the Red Barn. Back in behind up. Do you know where there's a training for the bus people up there? There's a training office. There's if you go up Commercial Circle, Commerce Circle, yeah, you can almost get to where the farmhouse was, just up in behind there. This is something I didn't know until Stu told me. That's his dad, Stu's dad, driving that tractor. It's homemade from parts, bits and pieces of different cars, and used it for years till they bought a new one. Oral history. We're talking about books. You can have clippings, you can have genealogy, pictures. One of the most priceless things making this book was the oral history. And I'm just going to read the one, Bringing Home the Cows, by Diane. She said, after school, the kids don't know anything about how to work these days, I'm afraid. After school, I used to go to the lower 5 acres. They had bought some more land down Glanford to get the cows. That's where they were all day. That was my job. I had to get them and herd them home along Glanford Avenue, which was just a gravel road back then. Sometimes old Joe Ferry, who lived across kitty corner to where the Red Barn is now, would be there too, getting his cows, and we'd all meet right at the corner of Van Almen. Our gate was on the southwest corner, and old Joe's was over on the other side. And sometimes we'd get all the cows on the road at the same time. Glanford used to be the main road to Sydney, and if the cops or the fire department came along, we'd be there with all these ruddy cows trying to sort out whose cow was whose. Those are priceless stories that are lost when people pass on. So it's really important to me to get that. This is a story about Lillian. This book doesn't focus so much on Minnie's sister Lillian, but she apparently had a stroke and on a trip to Winnipeg to visit one of her kids, and they I don't need to go into it. Anyway, there's the picture on the cover. I just love that because everybody's there. And in 1983, the Islander ran a long piece on the Palfrey family. And fortunately, the families have saved some of these. Some of them I can find other places. But it's important to put in. And so Wilf Palfrey and Minnie, that's Stu's mom and dad, after being farming for so many years, when they retired, they went back to England to see Wolf's family in Devon. And this is pictures from England and a newspaper clipping that appeared in the paper back in England. And there they are as older people up on Cortez Island. Their newspaper clipping about their 50th anniversary. This is Lillian and her latest husband, the short guy in the middle. Twice widowed. On this day, she married George Exton, brother of her first husband, Edward Exton. So the best man was Stan Exton, son of her new husband, so the tall guy on the left. And on the right is Stu's mom. This is another great. How do you like this for the beginning of a story? I lost Bonnie in a snowstorm once. When Diane told me that, I was talking to her on the phone. I went, whoa, what? I have to hear the rest of this. So after school, we were supposed to come home down Glanford Avenue, but my girlfriends lived on Kerry Road near Panama Flats, and I wanted to walk with them come up Judah Street and cut on to Glanford. It was snowing that day, and it got thicker and thicker, and Bonnie was late coming home, so my mom was really well. I got a licking that time. I had to go out. They sent me out by myself to go look for her. You know, your kid comes home and you've lost your sister. Well, it's normally we'd all like say, okay, we'll all go look. But they say, you find her, it's your responsibility. So they sent her out by herself to go look for her. She was down Glanford Avenue, where the Glanford School is now, near Judah Street, just in that gully. She was coming down the hill. There in the snow, I found her and brought her home. I know I got into trouble and probably was sent to bed with no supper. We were all supposed to come down Glanford Avenue and never leave one another. Yeah. So those were the days. So here's Lillian. Lillian Exton was a janitress for 34 years. And Diane says that she was a nanny to some of the kids. She would take me up to the teacher's room if anything was the matter. If you tripped or fell, she'd always kiss it better, put a Band-Aid on it. So it's the Mackenzie Avenue School is the one I've been trying to think of. She worked at the Mackenzie Avenue School for years. So, okay, I was talking about John Adams, who came from England, who worked in the iron furnaces in Yorkshire and Lancashire. He had told you he brought 3 kids with him because his wife had died. Well, one of them was John Thomas Adams, who became the guy who he worked in the ironworks here and cast over 1,000 of these posts that those famous Victoria iconic light bulbs are on. So John Thomas Adams, he was just 12 years old when he came with his father, and by the time he was 14, he was working in a foundry, and went on to be a manager of the foundry and became quite an important citizen. This is his family here, and they're down on 821 Esquimalt Road, and I went down, and that house is still there. You wouldn't recognize it. It's split into apartments, and all of the beautiful stuff's all just covered over, but I stood there and I took a picture of the doorway. I had right beside me, and I thought, wow, 102 years ago or whatever, another photographer was standing right where I am right now, looking at this family, at this post, at this porch here. Now we'll talk about Diane. I don't know if you guys, have you ever met Stu's sister Diane? Yeah. This is Stu and his brother Leighton. And Diane's on the left. Stu didn't have a date yet, and Diane was on the outs with her husband. So they got together and they went to a New Year's Eve at the Crystal Gardens. Probably some of you went to New Year's Eve at the Crystal Gardens. And Diane got married. This is Diane's marriage here. These two guys are brothers. They were boxers. Royce and his brother Kerwin. And then maid of honor is the next one over here is Bonnie, the one who became Susan's mom. Do you remember back then, if you got married, there was written up in the paper, what the bride wore and what she changed into when she went off for her honeymoon? By the way, if you look up Stu in the old newspapers, they used to. I told you I'd give you a rousing. They used to, if you got a fine for speeding or something, they used to put all the fines, the names of the people who got fined in the papers too. So I found a few of Stu's, and he remembers it. Oh yeah, I was doing this or I was doing that. It was going too fast. That's funny. This is Diane's kids. She had 7 children. But they didn't, Royce and her didn't get along too well, and they split up several times, got back together, split up. She's got her kids all lined up on the right-hand side, like the Von Trapp family there. So this is Bonnie. This is Bonnie, and it's a story here that Diane told me about Bonnie getting pregnant, and then making up a story about her going over to Vancouver to work for somebody when she actually was going to give birth to this illegitimate child. So I wrote it all down. So Bonnie's on the bottom. She actually ended up marrying Alan Goyette. Some people might know that name. And at the top here is the guy who got Bonnie pregnant with Susan. His name is Ronnie Moore. And apparently she didn't want to have anything to do with him. Apparently he came around the house, the farmhouse, and wanted to kind of like get to know her better, even though he knew her already, I guess, but she didn't want him, so sent him packing. And he ended up marrying that woman, Laverne Rickerby, in Ladysmith. And then Susan, over here on the right, she got adopted by that couple in behind, who are super nice people, and that's me in behind her on the left. And those are Susan's 2 kids from her first marriage. So it all worked out well. She found nice adopted parents. This is a bit about Stu here and his wedding. He married the beautiful Nikki. Unfortunately, she passed away, and so did one of Stu's kids. But it was nice of the families to give me these pictures, and they could be part of the book. Stu, as you know, is a fantastic, what did Diane says, he's the best body man in Victoria. And that's his red Mercury Meteor, Ford Meteor, 1960 Ford Meteor? 50, yeah, out there. And Stu's the last man standing. He's got the last piece of property that used to be part of the Glanford Dairy Farm. By the way, one time there were 4 dairies along Glanford Avenue.
No, more than that.
Well, I was told 4.
A lot more.
Okay.
We were talking about the other day.
Oh, yeah? That actually sold milk commercially?
Yes.
Anyway, the joke is today if Stu wants a quart of milk, he's got to go across the street to the Red Barn Market. Anyway, that's another thing. I took that picture with my iPhone. You know, so when you're making a book, take pictures. And this is a good picture of the farmhouse. We, at the last minute, added Wendy, because Stu has a younger sister who's 10 years younger than he is. And she had this great picture of the original farmhouse. This is fascinating because that's Wendy, graduation day, 1967. And in behind her, see that kind of a brown goldy colored house? That's Stu's. And he was already married and had built a house by the time Wendy graduated from high school. That shows the difference. So I asked, good reporter that I am, I asked Wendy, what's it like to be an unexpected child? You know, when your parents are in their 40s and you think you're all done, they think they're all done, and then you come along. So she wrote a little story about that, or gave me a little oral history. This is her wedding. And her family. And there's back to where we started. I've got a couple things to explain and then I'll be done. These books, I've been working with a company called Blurb. And the cheapest book to make is a little square one. And this is my first book. It was my son Josh was turning 40. I was living in Nova Scotia at the time, and I came out and took a whole bunch of pictures. Sometimes it's fun. Square pictures are interesting. As a photographer, here's the thing. I've been a photojournalist all my life, working I started with the Kelowna Courier in 1963, and I've worked for Maclean's magazine and the Toronto Star and all kinds of papers and magazines. And so putting pictures on paper is kind of second nature for me. So making books is where I'm at. And it was fun to take rectangular pictures and make squares out of them. Just crop. You realize you don't need a lot of the stuff on the other side. But then you get some really tight close-ups, which are quite fun, like that. anyway, I had a blast. Look at those tight close-ups. That's my son and his brother. And then I made, using the same thing, Susan's son Dusty. I mean, when we went through, this is such a treasure to have. We went through every photo we could find of him and his brother Amos, and put them all into one volume like this, so that you know how people are scattered around. You've got your pictures here, you're there, you don't know where they are on your phone or whatever. To have them all in one place is, you know, really nice. So in this one, I added little captions, dates, and I sectioned it. So I did it by year, you know, starting with the year of birth, and then I put the pictures organized them by year, which was fun, and makes a big, thick book. This is another kind of book. This is called a trade publication. It's kind of like a pocket book, I guess, because a book for reading, and the paper's a little different. But it's still, I still had lots of pictures. You can still put lots of pictures in it. Sorry, I'm not giving you guys much. What's your fault for sitting over there? Anyway, this was nice. This is my adopted dad's cousin. In 1948, at the age of 22, you know, everybody needs a good adventure before you get settled with mortgages and families and, you know, go backpacking in Europe or whatever. When she was 22, she went to England because she had relatives there, and she stayed with them, not just for a week or two, but for a whole year. And she took lots of pictures. They went walking all around, and they went up St. Paul's Cathedral. And she wrote, do you remember aerograms? You remember these little blue, very thin paper? You could write as much as you wanted, and you folded it up, and it became the envelope. And it was very easy to mail because it cost more airmail back then. Anyway, she had like a big stack of these, and because space was at a premium, there were no paragraphs. Just the writing just continued on. So I wanted to transcribe them, and it was like too tedious for me. But I was living in Nova Scotia at the time. I found a woman who was a secretary, and she took in part-time work. So I said, here's a job for you. So she typed them all out for me. And then I went through and reorganized them with paragraphs that I liked. And so she wrote, so her name was Mary Hayes. And she wrote one or two a week home to her mom, and sometimes to her minister, and sometimes to her sister. And most of these were saved. So another real treasure that would be lost. You know, she's now passed away. But I made about, I don't know, 15 or 16 of these books and gave them all to her relatives. She never had kids. By the way, speaking of books, the one that, this one that we're talking about today, I originally made 22, got 22 copies made. I thought that would be plenty. Once Wendy got on board and a few other people found out about it, I had to print 10 more. Just one more book here. This is another project I started when I first came to Victoria, because when Susan and I what had happened is Susan's mom, her adopted parents had died. And do you remember when color slides were in little yellow boxes from Kodak? In fact, you just, when you finished your roll of film, you put it in a bag with your address on it and a stamp, and put it in the mailbox, and then you got it. Yeah. So her adopted mom had I don't know how many there were, about 10 little boxes, and each color slide she had written on it, you know, in little tiny printing. So I put these all together. This is Susan at the age of 6, first day of school. Isn't that precious? And she's almost wearing the lampshade, which is a no-no. But yeah, so all these color slides, I was able to scan them or rephotograph them, actually. and put them together here, along with the captions and the dates, because Kodak used to stamp the date on the mounts. So I have the first 10 years of Susan growing up. Then her dad, who was the photographer, adopted dad, he died, unfortunately, when she was 10 and a half. And look at this. This was on a trip to, this is Esquimalt Beach. Susan was 1.5 or something. So that got me going on a book with better quality paper and the hard cover, which is what we decided to do. But here's a book I did about my travels to India before I discovered the hard cover and the better paper, but it still looks fine. This is me in 1967, and my first wife, Sharon. My parents took that just before we went off to India. So now I just got a couple things to show you here, and then we'll be done. I just got to go back. Where do I have to go back to here? Okay, so these are, if you're interested, there's the blurb address, blurb.com, newspapers.com, thebritishcolonist.ca. You can search any name. Like I said, you can search Stuart Palfrey. And Ancestry, where you might have some of your ancestors lurking. This is Blurb. They like you to, their latest template is called BookWrite. I made all of these with something called BookSmart, which is their older version, but I don't know, I haven't got into the new one, so I'm still using the old one, and it's still fine. But this is what I use to scan all these old photos. And if you get it, you can get a scanner for around, I was looking at it, was it $350, I think? So they have software to adjust color and
Here's Eric.
yeah,
When you were doing the slides,
yeah.
were you using that scanner or did you take them to a
No,
pharmacy?
no, and I don't have it to show you, but I have a light table. Do you remember?
Yes.
You put your slides out and you look through a loop. Well, I have a camera set up over the light table with a macro lens, 1-to-1 macro lens, and so I can re-photograph the slides, life size, full size, and digitize them that way. Make about a 22 megabyte file, which is just fine for me. So this is stuff this is what the kind of stuff I got. This is from Wendy. There's the house, and there's her and the bike, and there's her wedding photo. And like I said, the scanner has you can click color restoration, scan it, and boom, the color is put back. I made a nice print for her and sent that back with her originals. But to me, that's priceless, because a lot of old photographic material is faded. Well, fading's just one problem is easily solved, but if you look at this, I got this is from Stu's house, I think. That's the kids up on the barn tearing the roof off. But look, an archivist would shriek in horror if they saw that, because the corners are torn, the Scotch tape has been used, people have been writing on it, and it's ripped, and but you can see over on the left, I was able to fix it up a bit. I cropped some of it out and fixed up some of it, and looks just fine with, you never know. The other thing is these little snapshots. Do you ever get tired of looking at little pictures and you want to see big ones? I sure do. So in the book you can blow them up, and then you've got them big. One of the problems, Stu's mom was a cake icer at Woodworth's in Victoria, and she made cakes for
one of the bread companies.
no, Woolworths.
Ask Stu.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at him, but he's not telling me. But I did have it written down.
Did you work for McGowan's too?
No,
The company that your mom worked for, McGowan's Bread.
but that's not where. There's the story about.
I don't want to get too bogged down here. But this picture here, when Diane's mom took it into work to show around, that's when the other kid who worked there took an interest in Bonnie, and I thought it was Woolworths or Woodworths because I've got it written here somewhere. Anyway, she made these incredible cakes for every kid's wedding got a cake, right, Stu? And yeah, and this is Stu's cake. And I was going to use that picture, but the frame is all glued together, and I didn't want to start taking it apart, and so that's one of the problems. And other things that come along that are really interesting but didn't make the book was these are ration cards from World War II. And there's Bonnie Palfrey and Brian Palfrey, and Brian was Leighton. And then Wilfred, the father, up there, and Minnie, the mother in the middle. So fascinating stuff. But
What year are those mostly?
from the 42, 43, something like that, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, when I saw those, I was excited. So I think that's it. I'm not, yeah. Do you guys need those addresses at the beginning again?
Maybe you'll take some
There.
questions from the floor.
So questions from the floor? No? Anybody?
Newspapers.com, how far afield are those newspapers?
All over North America, for sure.
Really?
Yeah, US and Canada. You have to pay a subscription, you know. My birth father, my biological father, was from Kansas City, Missouri, so I was able to find out about him through newspapers. Any other questions about anything? No? Yeah, it's fun, and you learn so much about your neighborhood and your friends, and make new friends. All right, if there's no more questions, then I'm done.
Thank you.